Hello everybody and welcome to OmniPoke, the channel that brings you guys everything Pokemon. I'm Jack and today I'm here with one of our first Ultra Sun deck analysis videos. This time we're going to be taking a look at Garchomp Lucario, a really cool non-EX based archetype coming out of the new set. That's got a really good engine if you can get your first Garchomp out. In general I think it's really good to be a stage 2, or not necessarily a stage 2, but a non-EX based deck right now. Just because being non-EX but being able to trade up is really useful with a lot of these stage 1 GXs running around doing or having 210 HP. If you're able to hit that sort of mark on a one prize attacker, you're definitely going to be doing some favourable trades, and I think it's definitely a good sign for decks like this going into this format. So to kick us off, we do indeed have 4 of the new Ultra Prism Gible. This has the ability that gives it free retreat if there is a fighting energy attached to Gible, which is a neat little thing to have. We're not running the Ascension Gible from one of the earlier sets, simply because if you use Ascension, you leave a 80 HP Gabite in your active, which is very vulnerable. We don't really want our Gabites dying too quickly, so it's slightly better to have the free retreating quote-unquote Gible instead, because we don't really want to leave these guys active if we can help it. There's definitely Pokemon we'd rather have in the active in the early turns. That being said, we do run the new Gabite as well, which does indeed have Ascension. It's obviously a bit different going from a 60 HP Pokemon into an 80 HP Pokemon compared to 80 going into 150 or 130. So we don't mind using Ascension with this guy, just because we're a lot less vulnerable to being taken out quite quickly. He's also got a flat 40 damage for a DCE as well. Never going to be too useful, but it is worth noting we do have access to that attack as well. Finally, onto the Garchomps, we run a 2-2 split of the Breakpoint and the new Ultra Prism one. First off the Breakpoint, first off the Ultra Prism one, 150 HP, Fairy weakness, free retreat. Free retreat is really good. A lot of the Pokemon in this deck have free retreat. Both of the Garchomps do. The Gible does with its ability as well, and the rest of the retreat costs are all pretty low, so there's not going to be anything getting stuck active very often. The first attack for a DCE is a 50 snipe anywhere. This can be nice if you to finish off a game if you've taken a big chunk out of a Pokemon earlier on in the game, or maybe used this Garchomp to start setting up some of your other Pokemon. This can finish them off, so it's nice to have some kind of sniping within the deck. Also, it's nice for, like I say, setting up attacks for later on in the game with some of these bigger attacks on these two Pokemon. His second attack for a fighting DCE does 100 damage, and if you played Cynthia this turn, which is a new supporter that I'll go over in a little bit, this attack does 100 extra damage, so 200 for 3 is a fantastic output, especially when you've then got Choice Band to push it to 230. That's knocking out a lot of the Stage 1 Pokemon that are going around right now. So as I said earlier on, it's really good to uptrade with your with your one prize attackers, and that's exactly what Garchomp can do. Cynthia's a really good supporter in itself, but with the Lucario engine as well, there's a lot to like about this sort of attack. You're not only being forced, quote unquote, to use a good supporter for your turn, you still have Search, which is really nice. To complement this, we have 2 of the Breakpoint Garchomp. Turbo Assault does 60 damage for 1 fighting energy. Lets you attach an energy from any energy from your discard pile to one of your Pokemon, so you can get things like Strong Energy, DCU back with this, which is really important for setting up these Garchomps. It gives you access to the discard pile as well as searching from the deck through Lucario, so you can really build up Garchomps in a turn quite quickly. And then the second attack, Bite Off, for 2 fighting, does 80 damage and an extra 80 if your opponent's active is an EX. There's not too many EXs around right now, but this is really good for dealing with Volcanion EX, because just one Choice Band or Strong Energy means that Bite Off will take a knockout on a Volk EX. So it's definitely worth noting that you do have access to that. It's also cool that these two Garchomps have different weaknesses, so in different matchups you can sort of think about the weaknesses and which Garchomp you want to get out. Onto the support Pokemon, we have a 3-3 line of the new Lucario. The Riolu's pretty, not irrelevant, but not too important. Psychic weakness is pretty fine right now. There's not too many Psychic decks going around, and we do have access to a couple of his attacks. But in general, we're going to want to be looking at this Lucario with the really good ability. I believe it's called Aura Premonition. If you have a Garchomp in play, you may search your deck for, once during your turn, you may search your deck for any card and put it into your hand. So basically, what you want to be doing is getting a turn 2 Garchomp, which lets you then get one Lucario, which then means if you have one Lucario, you can search out your second, which can search out your third, maybe even. And provided you can always have a Garchomp in play, you're getting 3 searches through your deck per turn to grab exactly what you need, whether it's Guzma to finish off something that you've already set up, whether it's the Cynthia you need to be able to be doing this big damage, whether it's energy you need, all of these kind of things, choice bands, just more Pokemon. It's really, really good. Sort of restrictionless search is fantastic, and Garchomp is such a good attacker that requires the use of a good supporter anyway. It's a really, really good combo, all in sort of one nice little package. The attack for fighting colourless does 70 damage and is ignored by resistance. This is also definitely worth noting that we have, because not only Garchomp can one-shot a Zoroark with a Choice Band Strong Energy, this can also one-shot a Zoroark with a Choice Band Strong Energy as well. So Zoroark is definitely a popular Pokemon right now, so you want to be able to have multiple ways to knock that Pokemon out, and have access to multiple ways to win any deck that's running Zoroark, which is a lot of them right now. We've got a singular Alolan Vulpix. As we said, these guys technically have free retreat if you attach an energy to them. Even if you don't start with these, still only attaching one, meaning you can get into Beacon turn 1, is really, really good. Searching your deck for your Garchomp pieces, your Lucario pieces to start getting into this combo is obviously incredibly strong. So yeah, we kind of all know at this point why Beacon is such a good such a good attack, and that's why we're running it to really help us try and maximize getting into this Garchomp without taking too many slots away from their deck. And finally, of course, we're running 2 Tapu Lele GX. Turn 1 Brigette is another really, really important thing for this deck. So you have Gibles and Riolu, to be able to build up on your next turn. So turn 1 Brigette is still really important. And then just being able to access Cynthia's to boost your damage is really, really useful. In more than just searching through Lucario, we have access through Tapu Lele as well. On to the supporters themselves, we are indeed running, of course, 4 Cynthia. This is a new supporter from the set. Cynthia lets you shuffle your hand into your deck and draw 6 cards, so it's a reprint of Professor Sycamore's New Theory, back from Heart Gold, Soul Silver. Obviously, this is a fantastic supporter in itself. Shuffle Draw is always really, really good, but Shuffle Draw 6 has seen play in the past, will see play. I think this will be a 1 or a 2 of in a lot of decks. But in this deck specifically, we want 4 of them, just because it's also a plus 100 damage for the new Garchomp. So that's why we want exactly 4 of this card. Because it is also your increased damage output whilst using a really, really good supporter for the turn. We've got 2 N. Obviously, we still want N to be able to deny our opponents sort of searches that they're getting, and in the late game, being able to N our opponent down to a low hand size is going to be really useful still. That does mean we don't have access to the Garchomp's extra 100 damage, but later on in the game you can start to 2-shot things, or maybe use Guzmas and Ns rather than going for Cynthias and big one-shots, or alternatively you can use these in the early game to try and disrupt your opponent's setup whilst having this setup, having these Lucarios out, building your own board at the same time. So N is still really, really useful despite us kind of having to use Cynthia a lot of the time. It's not a case of if you don't use Cynthia for the turn you lose, because there are still definitely things the deck can do to stay in the game. 2 Brigette, as I mentioned when talking about Lele, it's really, really important to have access to Brigette, have access to many of these basics on turn 1, so you're able to build this board, build your Garchomps and your Lucarios. Again, as I've been saying, pretty much as long as this deck gets to turn 2 Garchomp and 1 Lucario, there's really not much opponents can do to deal with it, because the deck sort of runs off its own back at that point, and you can start getting exactly what you need to close out the game or just progress through the game normally. We've got 2 Guzma. Normally you'd see sort of 3 Guzma in standard decks right now, but again, as we're having to use Cynthia quite a lot, we don't necessarily want to be Guzmaing a lot of the time, because it's not always going to be Guzma for a knockout. We may have to use some of the sniping attacks or some of the other attacks earlier on in the game to start setting up Pokemon on the bench. But that being said, of course, Guzma is still an incredibly strong card, and we want to have access to being able to pick and choose our prizes if we're able to, somewhat anyway. So Guzma is definitely still worth the slot. Finally, 1 Sycamore. Power Cycle is always going to be useful. And again, whilst we're still probably going to want to be using Cynthia a lot of the time, having one Sycamore is never going to be really a bad idea, especially on turn 2 after you've Brigetted. Being able to search for Sycamore, just use it that once, is really, really strong when you're maybe going to be getting a knockout anyway, or you're not aiming to go for a knockout. In the early turns, you're going to be using the Turbo Assault Garchomp anyway, so that's when you're going to be using things like Sycamore and N and Guzma to set up knockouts for later on in the game. Onto the items, we have 4 Ultra Ball, of course. Not really much to be said here. 4 Ultra Ball is just pretty standard in most decks right now. We have 4 Rare Candy. Again, Rare Candy pretty standard in Stage 2 decks right now. We are, of course, running a 3-4 line of Evolution cards for Stage 2. That's because we really want to guarantee having multiple Garchomps out to make sure we never lose our engine through Lucario. So we want to try and ideally get a Garchomp and a a Gabite online on turn 2 if we can, just to make sure we don't ever lose access to Lucarios or a Premonition. Similarly, that's why we're also running 2 Evo Soda, just to be able to keep it evolving up. It's another fantastic search card for Lucario, and as soon as you hit one Lucario, you're able to get your other Lucarios and start cycling through your deck. 2 Rescue Stretcher is really important, especially as we have this split of Garchomp. There's going to be situations where you pretty much solely just want to use the Fighting Garchomp, and there's going to be situations where you pretty much solely just want to use the Dragon Garchomp, and being able to access those is really, really important, especially as they're only a 2 count due to the 4 cards of 1 name rule. It's also really, really good for recycling your Lucarios later on in the game if your opponent starts targeting them down rather than your Garchomps. If they start targeting the Lucarios, you're able to recycle your Lucarios through Rescue Stretcher. Field Blower, another really, really useful card right now, means that we can get rid of some of these awkward tools. Things like Choice Band don't affect us, but things like Fury Belt can be annoying. Float Stones are always good to get off the board. Getting rid of Parallel is another huge use for Field Blower. You want to have quite a big board set up with this deck. You're often going to have sort of 1 Lele, 1 Vulpix, and then 2 Lucario, 2 Garchomp. You don't really want to lose much of that board. Ideally, you'll lose the Lele and the Vulpix, but sometimes there are going to be situations where you don't have that kind of setup, so we don't ever want to be paralleled down. Plus, once they have parallel locked down, we don't run our own sort of counter stadiums, so we can't bounce it any other way, so we can't ever play our own Leles or whatever. And, you know, it kind of gets awkward when people start paralleling you. And again, it's just another really, really useful card to have against things like Garbodor, which also stops our search through locking us out of the game. We have 1 Palpad, a card that's returning from, I believe it was Flashfire the first time this was printed. Lets you shuffle 2 supporter cards from your discard pile into your deck. This is really good for recycling these Cynthias, meaning that you're guaranteed more of the sort of plus 100 damage it gains through using the new Garchomp. Plus, it means that we also have access to more Guzmas and more Ns later on in the game, if that's the strategy we want to use to try and lock our opponent out of the game for the rest of the duration of the game. It's really, really useful to have access to one of these, especially as we can Palpad and then search out the exact supporter we want with the Lele or Lucario. And finally, for tools, we have 3 Choice Bands. Sorry, again, it's really useful having Choice Band help with maths on things like Zora and stuff, but also it pushes Garchomp into one-shot range against a lot of these 210 HP Pokemon. Cynthia plus Choice Band will knock out all of these 210 HP Pokemon, which is really, really nice. And yeah, it's really, really useful to have multiple copies of this. Finally, onto the energy, we have 3 Strong Energy. Because the Dragon Garchomp, and the whole evolution line is Dragon based, we can't really attach these very early on in the game. This is often going to go on the Turbo Assault Garchomp, if anything, but we can attach them through the Turbo Assault Garchomp onto our Lucarios as well, if we have to discard them early. But yeah, Strong Energy is a fantastic special energy card. Giving that plus 20 is going to push you into one-shot range a lot more often, and obviously we need it for maths along with Choice Band to start getting one-shots on Zoroark GXs, which are ever popular right now. We've got 4 Fighting Energy. All of the attacks that we're going to want to be using are based on Fighting Energy, so we need to have some way of attaching to the Dragon types as well, and obviously we can't do that with the Strong Energy. And finally, for DCE, this the main attack that we want to be using that's abusing Cynthia's power is DCE reliant, so we want to be able to use that as well. We can accelerate DCEs with the Turbo Assault Garchomp, so we don't mind discarding them early and, you know, attaching them later on through the attack. So yeah, it's just going to mean that we always have access to these strong attacks in 2 turns. A couple of other options you can use, as we have to use Cynthia every turn. We can't be ending and Guzmaing like we can in some other decks, so you may want to try out counts of things like Counter Catcher, as we're a non-EX deck. Our opponents may naturally take some prizes quite quickly on us, because a lot of our Pokemon are weaker than some of these GXs, so you may be able to abuse Counter Catcher. We can also use Red Card, which is another card that can sort of imitate using N whilst using our own Cynthia, so we can disrupt our opponent whilst still getting this bonus damage for Garchomp's attack by using the Cynthia supporter for the turn. But yeah, we'll try to keep it pretty simple. We haven't got any of those sort of gimmicks in here right now, just because we wanted to guarantee we try and get turn 2 Garchomp into turn 2 Lucario and just build a board that our opponent has to deal with, and try and make them take 6 prizes. As I said at the start of the video, I think being a non-EX right now is really, really strong, and this is definitely one of the best non-EX decks we've had in the past few sets, I think, coming out, that I think will probably be a pretty solid tier 2 archetype, that I'm definitely going to try and League Cups once the set is finally released. But yeah, other than that, thank you very much for watching. Hopefully you liked the deck. Let us know if there's anything you'd change, anything we've missed out, or anything else you want to say down in the comments. Thank you very much for watching. I've been Jared from OmniPoke, and I look forward to seeing you guys in another video.